Now it's Mandark, Chapter 7 by Richard S. Shaver, published in the Shaver Mystery Magazine, Volume 2, Number 2, 1948. And it became Lila's wish to have Yahveh under her hand, a slave of her pleasures, and into her loneliness blossomed a plan. She did not understand what her Lord was trying to do, did not understand or believe in his ways of thought, of his intent of good works for the future of man. To her, the race of man was a kind of toy animal, made for her pleasure and profit, and nothing else at all. It deserved no consideration from her, and she was sure it would get none. Little love was wasted on her by the increasing number of the followers of Yahveh, who could not understand why he had attached to his person a female of such obviously unvirtuous nature. So she was left to herself for most of the time each day, and only occasionally could she inveigle the young god into her arms for passion's surcease from labour. Surcease. The love she bore him did not die, but it shrank and changed under the light of her inherited biased devil's reason into another thing. He became a desired thing, a something she wished to humiliate, to make bow down to her, to obey even unto death, to make her creature utterly. So it was that Lila took to searching through the largely empty and abandoned laboratories for a certain bottle of the old time bearing a certain label. For the lore of the caves was one which included centuries of searching such stores and examining the properties of drugs and chemicals they found there by experiment. And such knowledge of what might be found and what certain strange symbols upon bottles might mean was a lore handed down from witch mother to imp son to witch maid, and many and devious were the uses to which the ancient medicines, aphrodisiacs, and nutrient and medicinal fluids and powders were put by the savage underworld races. For instance, a certain label, elixir, was one greatly sought everywhere in the caverns, for the liquid it contained was so potent for health as to make an old man seem young again. And finally she found the little brown capsules in the box marked nopium. Cannot opium. For in those days the poppy's gum was not shortened to the name opium, open your eyes. It has made you sleep, meant cannot open your eyes, root meaning. With the box of potent sleep powders in her hand, the silkenly slithering sandals of Lila whispered back to her place in the sleeping chamber of the young god, her mind a stiff guard against any matching mind. And Lila dressed up her hair with great care, and her body she oiled with sweet perfumed oil of Samarkand, and slicked on the fragile blossom petal fabrics from the ancient time to stand bewitchingly before Yahveh, dressed like a princess, but with her mind full of a hidden evil resolve. The giant youth probed her face with his eyes, searching for some change in her which he sensed but could not fathom. Above, in Jerusalem, the feast of the Passover was come, and Jesus was at the home of Simon the leper. Yahveh sat to table with Lila on dirty, serving his synthetic foods from the ancient stores, and pouring him drinks from the vials of the god. Those liquids and solids known only to modern man by the legendary words nectar and ambrosia, the food of the gods. With her back to him, and her mind skipping swiftly from elusive image to image, so that no guarding ray would catch her thought, Lila dropped a pellet of sleep-producing drug into the young god's cup. The deed was done. Her father's evil nature had gained the ascendancy over her Yahveh-inspired goodness. But could she carry to fulfilment her long-hidden plans? Soon the great black and beautiful limbs of Yahveh were sprawled in deep slumber, on his silken couch, in a sleep more profound for the terrible strain of the last years, a strain seldom relived by natural sleep. A strain seldom relieved by natural sleep for him. While he slept, as was her habitual custom, Lila went to his great long-range ray and sent the glittering view ray, which was also the conductive bearer of many kinds of deadly electric flows when so adjusted, sent the deadly beam sweeping and wheeling along and across the lines of battle. For many months she had thus seized every opportunity so to watch and revel her soul in the terrible scenes of struggle and death. But her purpose had been to accustom the warriors and watch rays to seeing her at the controls of Yahveh's ray weapons. Usually Yahveh had been there to watch her, and no one had seen any harm in her play. But this time the ray was not under the hands of Yahveh's loyal Lila. Instead, an ambitious woman had seized her first opportunity for assertion of her domination. Her will to power had subjugated all love and loyalty to Yahveh within her mind. And as the great ray wheeled and swept in long arcs across the battlefield, every man it touched or approached dropped. And no loyal men at the rays, still conscious, could reach Yahveh's ray. For Yahveh knew better than to set up a ray field in a way that it could be assaulted by treachery within. This very customary precaution of all ray warfare proved Yahveh's undoing today. For no one could stop the slaughter of the royal troops by the treacherous hand of the mistress of Yahveh. As the well-known ray of the Master, Yahveh himself, swept thus in sudden, treacherous murder across the beleaguered battle lines, many a worshipper of the might and wisdom of Yahveh looked and cursed him as he died, unknowing what had happened, knowing only that the Master had gone mad and was killing them at their posts. The sweeping search rays ceased their long, tedious watch arcs and stopped from their poking and prying along the ways leading into the stronghold of wisdom, and took up instead the auto movements of short, sharp areas of mathematically calculated coverage, which they were constructed to make when no hand was at the bar of control. While Jesus was being betrayed above the surface in Jerusalem, the Messiah of the ancient writings, the true answer to all true ancient prophecy from the elder God's words, the actual Messiah, was being betrayed by his mistress deep below the soil of Jerusalem. The whole front line of Yahweh's army, an arc over 60 miles across, long-range rays run to 60 miles and more range, penetrating through rock as a knife through butter. And there are those who swear to 125 miles range. These fell silent under the traitorous, unexpected fire of Lila from the master weapons used so long by Yahweh's hands alone, and Lila's only sometimes playfully. Her huge ray swept on out toward the armies of her father, and her thought came to him over the ray, swiftly told him of the turn the war had taken. Now, down upon the suddenly defenceless lines of mech of the loyal warriors of Yahveh came a swift concentration of a multiple of ray beams. They fell, those helpers of the last true God, like 10 pins. The hell of destruction, the cries of his dying men, struck vaguely through Yahweh's sleeping, drugged mind. The great black man raised himself feebly, struggling mightily for consciousness against the drug. Lila turned to him from the great seat before his weapon board, where the many controls were set in a great intricate bank of switches, dials, and levers. She spoke soothing, honeyed, loving words to his drooping, heavy-lidded eyes. But the tones of her voice, from which she could not keep some note of exultation, sparked within Yahveh a sudden memory of past readings of her mind. His God-swift mind, even in its drugged sleep, could not help relating together the exaltation in her voice with his knowledge of her hidden desires. Only his defeat could rouse exaltation in her. Only the coming slavery and debauch of his person to her foul, inner lustful desires could cause just those notes in her voice. Yahveh struggled to his feet, his great body driven by a will that no man living on earth could equal, and struck Lila one blow with the back of his hand. She fell against the far wall and slid to the floor unconscious. He mounted the firing seat of the monstrous engine of destruction which had proved his undoing when Lila got hold of its controls. The chief defence of his sanctuary when he was in control. And Yahveh fired steadily with a great scythe of destruction, leaping out in an arc for 100 miles across the honeycombing caverns, upon the many lines of the advancing armies of Satantes on dirty. The devils were pushing forward 1,000 new weapons, were near his line of defence. They fell now by the hundred, by the thousands, under his terribly accurate fire. But the caverns were aswarm with them in all directions. All the many allies Satantes had called in from the farthest caverns. Many armies pushed steadily ahead against the terrible fire of this angel of the Lord, Yahveh the Terrible. From his rear they pushed nearer and nearer, unobserved even by Yahveh. At the last, a mass of hundreds of beams of numbing paralysis rays converged at the base of the great flashing column of fire death that marked the titanic energy source of his weapon's firing beam. Cut the terrible strength of the dynamos behind it. His mighty brain at last blacked out under the combined irresistible flows of numbing penetrative rays. Above on the surface, "Art thou the Christ?" asked the high priest. And Jesus said, "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." Jesus was in sore straits above, but had a supreme faith in the might of the invisible, unseen power which had protected and taught him so long. Chapter 8. Satantes on dirty, sitting on his golden chair within the great gloomy chamber called the torture room, gloated over the bound limbs of the great ebony figure of Yahveh the Terrible. Yahveh was bound with many wires of the ancient unrusting metal to what had once been an operating table. This place, the torture room, had once been a part of the ancient hospital of that forgotten city of the depths. This hospital, since the degenerate evil devil race had no use for such tender thoughts as caring for each other when sick and injured, even their own relatives or friends, had for centuries been used solely for the purposes of prolonged torments. These profound tortures were immensely aided by the medical rays, which were used for no other purpose by the stupidity of the ruler's people. They were especially potent beneficial rays, and would keep a victim alive many lifetimes after he would have ordinarily have died of sheer agony. These rays were so potent that a limb could be severed, replaced, and healed together again. Needless to say, torture under these conditions was a vastly more intricate art than without the life-prolonging beneficial rays. Lila had been sent to her former quarters, her father expecting her to take up her former life of obedient child where she had left off. But Lila had drunk of strong waters since she had left her home to follow the lure of the mighty strength and beauty of the son of the elder gods, and was no longer content with the role of an obedient child. Seated in her own rooms before the potent ray mech with which it was equipped, a mechanism brought specially for her from far-off Tibet, and excelled in power only by her father's personal equipment, she swept her master ray down into the room where Yahveh lay bound, stretched by the many wires wound tightly and painfully around and around his body and the great wheeled table. The table had been pushed before Satante's great golden chair, as was the custom for these frequent entertainments of special invitation. Yahveh looked calmly with his unsupportably brilliant and penetrating gaze at this slim, dark madman who now held his life in his cruel and shapely hands. But what Yahveh saw did not reassure him, for there was little in the face, that hook-nosed, weak-chinned, vague-eyed face that attempted to stare down the great spirit of Yahveh. But Satantes could only flush and lower his own black eyes with their long, girlish lashes before the simple, open scorn in Yahveh's look. This dish of terror on the strength of the dark figure bound before him was too strong for Satantes. He wished heartily the business could be gotten over without his presence, which was for him a most unusual wish. But then he reasoned he did not need to look at the black magician's eyes. Satantes waved one jewelled hand. The whole vast room twinkled the light from jewelled ancient pillar to glittering statues, gemmed eyes, to the metal fixtures of the time-forgotten hospital, and back to glitter again in the stones of the rings on that hand that was bidding a horrible deed be done. Since Yahveh's eyes were green pools of mighty wisdom, of terrible truth, of vast sanity and clarity, and only an honest and sane man could look into Yahveh's eyes without panic striking into his soul, the mindless, grinning slaves of the torture room put out those two terrible eyes of Earth's sane man, and Satantes gloated now, for he dared to look upon the face of the son of the gods. As Satantes sat thus gloating upon the bloody sockets of those terrible eyes, as his face flushed with triumph, Lila Ondirdy swept her view ray down into the torture room in search of her captured husband, in search of him whose love had not been denied her or away from her for many moons. Her young eyes became suddenly bright as a snake's, and the glitter of death came into them. The wet of her lips became suddenly the dew of venom, as she saw what her father had done to her lover and was preparing to do further. And no thought of planning was required of her to remove the only obstacle between her and rule of all Satante's kingdom, and his wealth that was so much greater than any surface ruler's. As Satantes thus sat gloating over the doing of his obedient slaves, a great bolt blazed suddenly down from above, from Lila's swift young hands, and her father's yellow teeth bared in a greater grin still as he clutched at his chest, where suddenly a great hole had appeared, and the blood gushed over his golden and scarlet robe, and pooled at his feet as he tottered and fell, scrabbling in the blood from his own breast. The whole room filled with the smell of the burning flesh of his chest. But Lila had made quite sure there would be no mistake about whether he was dead or not, and her voice came after the bolt and told the slaves to stand and move not till she came. Something within Lila had revolted? No, indeed. She had planned all this very carefully, move by move, as she had hoped it to occur, just what would happen next. She had meant from the first to kill her father after her treachery to Yahveh had placed Yahveh in her power, under her rule, in her hands alone. But her movements had been obstructed, and her timing confused by the fuss of many slaves and maiden friends and other distractions. Satantes had lived a few moments longer than she had planned upon. She mused as she sauntered down to the torture chambers to take her place in her father's great golden chair, which had watched so many good men torn to pieces for his entertainment, to remove the great seal of power from his finger and place it upon her own thumb. Perhaps it will be safer to have a blind lover than a rebellious and jealous Yahveh watching over me with eyes. Lila had her will now. Those things she had planned and wished for so long had all fallen her way now. The caverns, those known to her, all lay ready for her power to dominate and exact tribute. The mighty Yahveh, the great black-skinned magician, was a blind and helpless man wholly in her hands. She would miss those eyes, she mused. But there were other things in life. She walked lightly, triumphantly, happily into the torture chamber. Now between Lila on Dirty and Yahveh, son of Jehovah of Sabaoth, began a strange and terrible struggle that was not to be ended so long as they both had breath. Lila, making from habit with her body those sinuous little movements of her lips and waist and breasts that had first enraptured Yahveh, with her eyes hot upon his blind sockets, realized suddenly that the mighty black man would never again see her with his eyes, and that her chiefest weapon against his will, the weapon that had always won for her time to obtain her will in one way or another, her beauty and its effect upon his virility, the lure of her dancer-trained body's seductive wisdom, was now gone from her. Slowly, less happily and gladly, she went and sat upon the great gold chair where her father had sat to enjoy so many prolonged death struggles of so many brave men in the past, went and seated herself upon the chair where it dominated the sightly room of the ancient art of healing that was now so tainted with blood and death of centuries of evil that the odour of an age of agony and butchery hung like a charnel house there. She looked moodily down upon the bound and blinded black body of the mighty young giant, where he lay before her on the great wheeled table. With carefully chosen and honeyed words, she sought carefully to acquaint the proud young godling of his new status, of her will to have him for her willing slave, and not as any dominating lord of her bedchamber and her fate at all, of her plans to rule over all the cavern world and over him as well, and her words were these: "O my prince of darkness, how sad it is that I could not kill my father quickly enough to save your eyes. As soon as I might reach a weapon, the deed was done, but I was too late. No more can you see my body in the dances you love. No more can you delight in my face that has given you so much joy in the past. But with the mental vision of Talorg Mech, you may yet see in those other ways that are so vastly more intimate and revealing, so that in truth not so much is lost to you. And you can borrow eyes by the use of such mech ray to see all things. Not much is lost you." The young god had only stared at the sound of her honeyed voice with his sightless, bloodily painful sockets still dripping from the deed, and would not talk to her. She had not unbound him from his place of torment. He had not seen the ray which had killed her father, and if he had, there was no way to know it was her who had killed him, or if she had, knowing her devious mind, he had no way of knowing it was a deed done for love of him. Did she not now inherit all her father's power and wealth? He had not forgotten that she had turned against him and had brought all his life work to a nothing. He would never forgive her. Finally he made answer: "Lila, daughter of evil, whom I have tried to make into a servant of love, tell me this. Now that you inherit your father's power over these poor mad devils of a people of yours, over these slaves and women and servants of your fathers, what do you mean to do with all this inheritance?" "First, O my prince, I mean to make a willing servant of you, so that no more must I wait upon your word, or consider your wishes before my mind dares to think of plans or ambitions or pleasures or desires. I will show you the way to mighty empire with that power, but an empire in which I am the head and not you. You must answer to me upon your mighty word of honour that you will obey me, that you will strive to make me as great as you could have made yourself, great had you thought and planned as I would have thought and planned, or as you would now have become but for my father's savage warring against you. You must admit once and for all that I am the ruler, and you the obedient servant of my power. I must have your word, for I know that your pledge is the strongest tie by which I could bind you, mightier to you than chains of dungeons. I do not mean to let this power I have acquired be given over to you, for I am a wayward woman, and you might one day be angry with me and put me aside. But young Yahveh, sorrowing for his eyes that were gone, and filled with a terrible God anger against the stupidity and evil of this woman that had frustrated all his plans for the future, would not give Lila on Dirty, the daughter of King Satantes, any promise of any kind. Now Lila sought to frighten him by putting the torturers again to work upon the mighty male beauty of his body that lay naked before her in his majesty, a terrible tower of dark strength fallen before her evil will. And a great fear of him struck deep into her evil soul, and that fear became resolve to make this man something that could never hurt or avenge his God anger upon her. The young godling, bemused with many thoughts of all that had so abruptly ended his efforts towards supremacy to regenerate the human race with the ancient wisdom, with the darkness of blindness and pain concealing the purpose of the many hands about him, did not resist in any way. When the pain struck into his mind, he succeeded in killing 2 of the many slaves with blows of his head. Lila laughed shrilly at his futile struggles to break the wires that bound him, and gasped a little with fear of the terrible strength that had slain 2 of her slaves before her eyes, even though he was bound. Now they kept on under her orders, gave him slight cuts with their knives, and little searings with the red-hot irons, to show him what might happen to him who should resist the will of the new ruler, but he paid no attention to them. Yahveh only stared upward toward space with his sightless eye sockets, and filled his mind with the complete realization that this was his first genuine understanding of all earthmen's despair. For now he knew that there was truly no hope for man to progress ever upon this evil planet turning under this evil sun. And he understood why the elder race had fled from the sun so fearfully. And he knew that what Lila would do, and prayed silently she would do it swiftly. Slowly, a burning insane anger, the heritage of her evil and tainted family, began to flame terribly within Lila's veins, and the fire flamed higher and higher against this stubborn black giant who would not acknowledge her as the dominant one. Who then was this black giant who would not acknowledge her, would do nothing but refuse her every wish, yet expected of her such servitude as he would not give himself, such submission as required only of slaves? He should find out who Lila on Dirty was. He should crawl at her feet yet. At Lila's angry words and shouted orders, obedient to her flaming eyes, now bent over the blind giant's face, obedient to her gesturing wild hands that beat in anger upon Yahweh's chest, fearful of Lila, the daughter, even more than they had been of her father, and even more than the superstitious fears they bore toward this terrible son of the darkness, this creature of the night, this mighty black warrior from no one knew where. Lila's slaves began a more serious torture of Yahweh to break him to Lila's will. Yahweh's mighty muscles bound his great body in an armour of swift and terrible force, a rippling black armour that gave fear to any man who looked upon it, for it was superhuman strength. So they cut through those mighty god muscles one by one, slow cutting, drawing the ragged knife edges deliberately through the gaping, terrible wounds, slowly and agonizingly, till the steel grated on the bone. The slaves, not doing the terrible work suitably, and not getting from Yahweh's trained nerves and terrible will more than groans of anguish, Lila suddenly took the tools from their hands in a fury and sent them all from her sight. She remained, gazing upon the wreck of the mighty beauty she had worshipped, now seen through a haze of hate and frustrated anger. That was a gloomy chamber, that past place of godlike mercy when it was the home and hospital of the elder race. Now to see the last son of the elder race, his black and beautiful form, a wreck and an evil deed forever there in that place. That spirit that is Mother Earth, that is called Tithia, or Tythia, came softly through the rock walls weeping, and tried to touch Lila's heart with her misty fingers, and leaned over the bloody Yahweh's still form, and kissed him gently, and went away weeping to that place that is everywhere under earth, to sleep, and weep again, and sorrow away the years that must pass before the earth's last agony is reached. For that was a place where she had wept often, and where many another brave man had given up his all to avoid one slight additional agony before death. Now Lila spoke to Yahweh, striving to hold her flaming anger from her words, saying, "O my Yahweh, give me one small promise that you will not work against me, that you will not try to avenge yourself upon me, and we will let time cure the anger between us and the differences that have brought us to this pass." But Yahweh scorned her with words, saying, "Wanton, faithless, foolish one, life is no longer desirable to me, with you or without you. You could never understand what I think." And the terrible anger again flamed through all Lila's body, and her veins were liquid fire, and her hands seemed alive with hate, and she went on with the terrible work. The scorn he held for her was seen by Lila, and this knowledge burned away the love she had had for him to the last part. Nothing lived within Lila on dirty but the flaming spirit of evil which she had inherited. and always as she worked she asked, shrilly or mutteringly, "Yield to me your word of honour that you will uphold me, will be my liege man." But Yahweh only stared at her blazing mad beauty with his sightless empty sockets, and smiled a strange sad smile, and did not even groan now, for pain can deaden the nerves. Or Yahweh set his will against the feeling of pain. The tower of dark strength she had loved became under her hands a blood-sodden wreck, a swiftly dying man. And the day dragged on, and still Lila laboured and racked her brains for ways to hurt, to agonise this kind of stubbornness. And she found not any in her memory of all the many tortures and devices for wringing pain from the victims were effective against Yahweh's will. For Yahweh knew well her nature, and that now she had turned entirely from his way, from his teachings, now that she had let her evil nature rule her entirely, there was nothing she would not do, no evil thing from which she would withdraw. And whether all these evils Lila did that day and later were her own will, or from some subtle synthetic will ray from a far Darrow ray man, we will never know. The record did not show that. Or perhaps it was Yahweh's will not to live any more under the domination of an evil will, for that would be the way of true logic. Now that failure seemed to claim all his hopes, it may be that the God logic of his record training indicated that the only hope for life lay in not allowing his divine elder wisdom becoming the property and use of evil ray rule by control, which he foresaw would be his fate. Yahweh did not think now that the race of men were doomed, no matter how many Yahwehs might labour on earth, to turn back the tide of evil degeneration that was swallowing forever all the clean spirit of man inherited from his mighty ancestors, and leaving instead a man that was less than animal for stupidity by the Titan standards, and an animal whose nature was less than the wild creatures, being so very evil where they were evil only by necessity. Whatever Yahweh thought during those hours of his torment, while above in Jerusalem for his disciple Jesus of Nazareth, the trail was shortening to the cross. We do know that the centuries to come after him were even darker and more terrible for all mankind than those that had gone before. And we know that today the atomic bomb has set the scene for even greater degradation and destruction of all mankind everywhere. It may be that his great wisdom foresaw all these things and bade him die now, instead of suffering on under Lila on Duty's evil sway. When the time of sleep had come again, and passed a half away, up above on the surface where the moon glowed softly over the hideous burnt desert, and over the man-built glory of Jerusalem the golden, that had always looked to the God-taught Yahweh like the made dreams of sterile pygmies worked out in stone and mortar, then Lila desisted at last from her labour, from her terrible labour of madness and rage and stupidity, from her labour of suddenly inverted love. Lila went and sat again upon the lovely ancient golden chair of her fathers that had been his father's and had once belonged to a child of the elder race. And she sat and looked upon the thing that had been the man she loved more than riches or her father's palace, once, long ago, when she had gone through the perilous caverns to be at his side. She looked upon the great black body that was now stripped of all strength and beauty, and left a horrifying bloody wreck upon the table. And she looked dull-eyed at her red-dripping hands, and at her white arms that were blood-dabbled to the shoulders. Never again, she thought savagely, albeit wearily, would those mighty thews carry that gigantic body under the stim-beam augment rays so swiftly that the eye could not follow his movements. Never again would those swift hands upon a ray control best an army of lesser men with slower hands. Lila wept, and bent her beautiful and now openly evil face toward him, her wild hair streaming madness about her naked shoulders, her hands all bloody clots, her white arms splashed with his lifeblood. She stretched toward him, and she asked him in a childish voice, from which all the wily feminine magic was gone forever for him, saying foolishly, pleadingly, "Yield thou thy will, my Yahweh." But Yahweh lay motionless and did not move, for he had been unconscious for a long time, though moaning and twisting steadily. The binding straps and wire now held uselessly his mighty limbs, since the muscles were for the most part cut through, and his life was nearly bled away, and still bleeding slowly through the great wounds. And as Yahweh lay thus near death, he heard the voice faintly and far away, and felt a great relief that he would no longer have to serve his sense of duty to men against the hopeless cause, to repair all the damage done by time and the evil sweep of the terrible day magnetic from the sun to this abandoned, pitiful remnant of a great race, the cast-off children of an ill-conceived experiment of the long-gone fathers of all men. And the weakness of death came upon Yahweh, and he slept. But the red and evil madness had left Lila's brain for a time. Something like the spirit of the girl who had wilfully left the ease of her soft couch in Satante's palace, and gone like a moth to the mighty flame of male life that was Yahweh, the young and mighty magician, from the depths of the mystery of the caverns, the terrible warrior who could defy the whole army of her father's ray fighters and live on and laugh at them, came again to Lila, and the weeping made her heart soft again for a time. Lila on Dirty rose from the chair, sobbing like a child, and pushed the wheeled table slowly across the floor. Under one of the ancient miraculous healing lamps, she pushed the now quiet body, and closed about herself and him the insulating walls of the chamber that keep the healing rays from escaping. reflect the beneficial rays back again and again upon the tortured body, so that a ray pressure of a very beneficial nature was built up inside. There, where no one could see her kindness, which was so unnatural to the race of people under Jerusalem, she bound up his wounds with cloths torn from her skirts, and went and left him under the healing lamp. And it may be that that kindness was the subtle spirit that is Tythea, our Mother Earth, working her sweet will through the woman's body. And it may well be that there is no such spirit as Tythea, or any spirit of any kind on this dull earth, but only men like you and I, and sometime in the future, if we try, like Yahveh again. For such is my belief. Lila went now sorrowfully to her bed, and left the great black mystery of Yahveh, the Messiah, within the healing chamber, the beneficial lamps burning warmly about him. The day came again, and the great, nearly empty castle that was before Satante's is now Lila's, swept the morning away. When the sun was midway of the sky, and the tally rays brought its light into the caves, Lila rose and ate a cheerless meal. Then she went alone down to the torture room, that was again for a time being used for what it was made for, to bring the sick back to health again. And she looked in upon the great man's racked and wrecked body, and love struck her. She said to Yahveh, "Oh, my prince, turn your ways from their mystery, and your heart toward me again, and we will yet rule together over all the vast underworld." But Yahveh, whose wounds had closed and nearly healed again under the mighty magic of the healing rays of the ancient wisdom, only shook his head and wearily closed his eyes. Suddenly, inexplicably, the red rage burned again within Lila, for she perceived only that Yahveh scorned and despised her, and saw no good in her offer of herself to him, of her good body to his wrecked and now ugly one, and that under any conditions other than his own choosing he would have none of her. She thought of herself as a despised convenience to Yahveh, and hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, nor serpent venom. This man, whom she thought had loved her, should refuse even to pretend for a moment that she might be the dominant one, and himself the slave. Lila, still only a savage child in the mind, and of no true development, could still see no other explanation in Yahweh's refusal of her as the ruler of her father's kingdom. She did not realize that in Yahweh's logical mind, a person once evil is never again a friend. A double cross could never be wiped out by any promise or words or even actions. She did not realize that he thought of her only as a mad woman whom he could not now understand how to placate, could not comprehend any more than a man tries to comprehend the vagaries of the ripples of crosswinds on water. For the vagaries of an evil nature to be figured out by a logical mind was to Yahveh very simple. It would always work out to an evil end if the motivation sprang from a mind tainted with the sun polarity and inductive of the disintegrant forces that cause evil will. For Yahveh thought of her only as a mad woman, with whom there was no way for logic to bargain or to reason about anything, for she had failed to remain loyal to him after he had demonstrated to her that he trusted her. For Yahveh there was no more to be said between them, for logic does not say that an evil person may be allowed to live at all where they may do harm to anything. Only in some unbreakable prison may evil be allowed to have life. And I hope that is not the true reason why we are too stupid to conquer space travel. That the cold logic of some god race thought does not forever condemn sun-planet life to the confines of these terrible sunburned worlds, because such, to their minds, may not rise above evil, cannot rise above evil. Footnote: in space are ethereal spirits, many kingdoms of them, just as described in Oaspi and many another book. But they may none of them come near this earth because of our sun. For the body of a spirit, an Etherian, is so slight, of such tenuosity, that the terrible ray flows of destructive energy upon earth and in the spaces around our sun, for light years away, tear and burn the sweet ethereal bodies of those we call peris, and by many another a name. But once this was not true of earth, and so we have the legends of spirits, and some of those oldest legends are true, for spirits of great tenuosity can live in space, which is clean of detrimental electric, which contains only supportive energies which keep their fragile bodies intact. And so it is. And men say that Typhia, Mother Mu, the very rocks of our earth, contain a spirit who is protected from the sun by the insulative rocks, and that this spirit tries and strives always to raise a race of superior being who will fulfill her possibilities for immense immortal life as the spirit of a planet, the god of all the earth. But our stupidity and the terrible destructive radioactive energy atoms from the sun, which shower ever a rain of fire upon the surface of earth, keep her surface parts blind and unable to help us as she could if she could know better than we need. But none know how to speak with her but some despised mystics and conjurers of her beloved jungles and deeper caverns. End footnote. In Yahveh's education from the ancient records, there was indicated death for Lila, or a cage for the rest of her life. So it was that Lila called again the torturers from their places. Footnote on torturers. These things that resembled men such as we call Nazis today, these things that obeyed Lila on dirty because she could hurt them, and because their minds had for many generations been partially removed by the ancestors of Lila, by the process called cutting, which is done with a needle of hot ray that penetrates the skull and cuts only where the two beams meet. One who knows of the survival of these terrible ancient arts of evil within the cavern world wonders if there were not some of Lila's strike still the driving force behind the Hitler mind. End footnote. Editor's note. Adolf Hitler was not like what any of us have been told, and this telling about Hitler began immediately America entered World War II. And in England it was told before then. And in America even it was told before then in one way or another, because it was in 1932 that the Jewish oligarchs, the priesthood and the rich men of Judaism, men of the law, modern day Pharisees, it was in 1933 that they declared war on Germany, which is the same year that Adolf Hitler was elected to power. As the Führer, he was made Chancellor in January of 1933, and later on that year, the National Socialist German Workers' Party was elected into government. So no, the Nazis, none of the Nazis, the so-called Nazis, or the members of the party, and certainly not Adolf Hitler, none of them were anything like what Richard Sharpe thought they were. He was just speaking from what he'd seen on television and heard on or what he'd heard on the radio and what had been published in the newspapers. And so it is even till today. But it is slowly changing. End editor's note. So it was that Lila called again the torturers from their places, and the table was wheeled out, the irons heated in the great brazier before the golden chair. The flaming-faced Lila on dirty took her place again where her father had sat, to watch what might yet be done to this stubborn captive to break that awful will for ever to her use. Yahveh's bones were a mighty and beautiful framework to hold up the God-life in him. But at Lila's burning, hissing words, they took their tools, and slowly, one by one, and little by little, the zombie-like automatons took their awful tools and carefully and religiously broke Yahweh's bones one by one, crushing them inch by slow inch, while Lila still kept shrieking her useless question, Yield, stubborn fool, yield me now. But Yahweh did not bother answering a maniac, not understanding how any answer might help him anyway. For such is wisdom that cannot comprehend the great depth of stupidity any more than stupidity can comprehend the vastness of reason. The devious ways of mad minds being a mystery to wise men always, while to the mad and evil nature the ways of wisdom are equally mysterious and hard to understand. Yahweh only moaned and frothed at the mouth, and rolled feebly about the table with the few sinews that were left to him, the rest of his sundered musculature jerking and jerking in futile attempted movement, and struggled thus futilely against the straps and cutting wires that had bound him so long. Involuntarily he struggled for the life that his reasoning mind told him quite clearly was valueless to him or to her now. And so his bones were broken, each of them crushed slowly along the whole length. And the work went on the whole day. When night fell and darkness came, and the upward pointing light bringing rays were shut off, and the moon far above on the surface of the green earth came out, and the green earth became a misty blue loveliness, still these things laboured to make a mighty mind understand what no man of sane mind could ever understand: how to get along with evil people, or how to make him understand he must serve minds less than his own, and that for ends which were to him the opposite of value, of goal. And at last they were through, and unconsciousness came to Yahweh, and he could no longer moan or writhe. Lila sat upon her lonely, lovely golden chair, and the moon was brought down to her on the great televisor screen above her, and silvered all her lovely lines and hanging, curling tresses, and soft-breasted womanliness of her, and her red-rimmed eyes that looked out of her evilly contorted face upon the wrecked thing, the mangled ugliness that she had made of the mighty man who had loved her beauty and the life that she might have become if the seed of madness and evil had not been so strong within her. This man had still loved her but a few days ago, and this man she still loved in the weird jungle of madness her mind was swiftly becoming. And again she took the wheeled table on which lay her hopes for greatness and her happiness, and pushed it through the opening into the healing chamber, and closed the walls about him, and again she turned on the great healing lamps electric, and again she went to her bed alone. She was slowly realizing that her will was not great enough to make evil deeds become of value, for she saw that in her first use of power she had robbed herself of everything she most desired on earth. But the evil stupidity that had usurped the tiny place in her mind where self-rule lives wept itself to sleep nor learned anything from her fool's work. Nor can evil people ever learn by such things. Footnote: for evil is not thought, but a usurpation of the power of thought by a greater power of electric flow than the cells can generate. Evil is an inversion of thought. Love is always hate in evil minds, and all other things invert likewise in proportion when evil takes over the mind. This whole race under Jerusalem suffered from the infection of disintegrants, which is called evil for want of a greater knowledge about it. For evil is sun-polared matter in the brain, and they acquired it by using apparatus which they had used to bring sunlight down through the rock into the caverns, the penetrative ray mech that they used in night time to watch the surface and the far cavern ways for danger. And the watching had given them sun-polared matter by infection, just as radioactivity infects even the dust in the room where there is radioactivity. Evil can be hereditary, can affect even the inmost chromosomes of the cells, but there is a treatment for it: the direction of a flow of will toward those centers to repolar the cells naturally, or the direction of a flow of synthetic body electric along those paths of the mind by ray toward where evil is detected by a polarity needle set to distinguish between sun and earth polarity. Both of these flows, natural and synthetic, can be made to rectify the evil cells into good earth induction again, and the miracles of conversion are these: they have learned to will themselves good again. Now, end of footnote. Now, Lila went on with the healing work without more torture for the blasted form of Yahveh. It took a long time. Yahveh still lived still and still laughed sometimes at her for not getting his greatest treasures from him as she wished, for he alone of all life on earth knew the ancient law and secrets of science. Lila read the scornful, silent laugh in his mind, and put a ray augment upon his head to see what the whole thought might be that made him laugh so at her. And somehow Lila was surprised to find there still the great being, enthroned within his own mind, who had ruled her so long, and still now would not accept her rule. Without his knowledge of the chemicals and materials of the antique laboratories, of the mysterious and miraculous equipment in the endless warrens of the ancient cities, without his knowledge of the language in which the great old thought records were symboled and the mighty metal books were inscribed, she knew there was no other could read the magic books, no other mind, no living man, but only Yahveh on earth could read those mighty secrets. She knew she was as nothing to what she could be if she could win these mental treasures from him. But now again the swift miraculous flows of antique healing energy from the great hospital lamps made the raw flesh heal back over the unending wound that was Yahweh's crippled body, had been his glory and was now his horror and his sorrow. The crushed bones slowly knit in twisted, shortened shapes of hideous appearance. Lila fed the bundle of pain till it was well and could think swiftly once again as before, without agony wrenching all his mind. For Lila had still mighty plans for the use of the terrible and powerful, the all-wise mind of this man she could not conquer. When he was as well as he would ever be again, she put the rays from a great master's mech special machine for the careful and multiple augmentation of many thoughts, many trains of thoughts simultaneously, so that the deepest, most hidden information stands out revealed against the all-hiding evasive thoughts. A telepathic augmentation with a multiple detector device of many little rays, which simultaneously augment all the various source areas of the brain and all the many various thought flows. But only the elder race had minds of such capacity that they had need of this device. And Lila thought she had surprised the thought of its use within the mind of Yahveh. She put the multiple rays upon Yahweh's head and prepared herself to spend a long time, many weeks and months, learning what she thought she must know to fulfill her plans. Above, in Jerusalem the Golden, the hideous farce of the crucifixion was playing to a close, and at last Christ died, crying aloud to his Father who had deserted him. That mighty figure of transparent black beauty, which the projection rays had brought to him so often during the days of his study. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which later days may have translated aright as to mean, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And to those who know the caverns, we know that when Christ died, below, many people, good people, died in torments with the true Messiah, or else that crucifixion never had taken place. For Christ could never have survived or done his work without the help of all such work needs today, still against the evil ray. It was truly a dark day for the world when the light and wisdom of the underworld below Jerusalem died of the onslaught of the rods, or the Darrow. And Yahweh's crushed bones slowly knit again in twisted, shortened shapes of hideous and evil appearance. His great black body was no longer like a god's, but rather like that which had been pictured by medievals as the devil's own twisted and limping form of blackness. Now, from her use of very complex ancient telaugment multiplex beams upon Yahweh's head, to which she had prepared herself to listen very carefully for many, many weeks, occurred a thing which Lila had not expected, but which Yahveh had foreseen when he allowed Lila to catch him thinking of the talor-ment plex. Lila was not over wise in the ways of these more intricate machineries, having only the little practical knowledge of it she had learned from her father, which was knowledge handed down from many generations of people who used the machinery, but did not study or learn a great deal more than pushing this or that button did this or that thing with the mech. The mighty brain of the young god, having manoeuvred Lila into a position where his augmented thoughts had become vastly stronger than Lila's listening thought, suddenly reached out through the wires and little carrier beams of T-rays. Through all the many augments his will reached out suddenly and seized upon Lila like a great invisible many-armed monster of strength. So that where Lila had expected to augment all the little thoughts of the young god to great strength, so that he might hide any wisdom from her, her own mind's thought flows were suddenly and completely overwhelmed. The great strength of the augmentation made his heard thought so strong to her that she could not help but obey him as would a robot, herself being overwhelmed by the vast flow of meaning from the augmentive orifices of the ray mech. So it was that Yahveh now took command of the terrible kingdom of Dirty. The black and bloody rule of the Dirties came suddenly to an end. Satantes is a name not to be confused with Satan. Is a common name, another form of Satan, and Satan is a common name in the caverns, as is John on the surface. So it was that Lila on Dirty became to the immobile cripple of a god a mental slave so long as he chose to keep the augmentive mech in operation, and Yahveh did not choose to shut the machine off again. Like a slave, Lila obeyed him now, compelled by the nature of the machine she herself had set in operation. And because it seemed to be still Lila giving the orders, and whom the people knew to be ruler now, it was Lila moving about and operating the many machines and ray mech of the private armament of Satantes, while the young god lay still broken and helpless within the healing mech. The other devils of the tribe paid no attention. The young god, by mental control, made Lila turn on the penetrating beams of beneficial rays, and made them sweep upward through the rock and into the tomb of the Jesus who had died upon the cross. And after a time the vitalizing rays had healed the body, still warm from the slow death of the cross, and Jesus breathed again within the dark sepulchre. For such is the virtue and nature of these rays. They supply the life cells with the activating currents of body electricity, synthetically, which cause life to be, until the dead cells again take up the work of making their own electricity. They are synthesized vital electric, of the same kind as the flesh cells of the body and nerves manufacture. And it is true that they can make a man live again, if he be not too long dead. But so can our own doctors, up to 12 minutes after death. And Yahveh was still healing himself within the healing ray chamber. And Christ just placed within the sepulchre when Yahveh forced Lila by his mind's augmented will to turn the great beneficial rays upward upon the still warm corpse. For Yahveh loved Jesus like a son, and for 3 days the mighty antique magic of life electric raced upward over the conductive penetrative rays through the rock and into the dead body, making it live in spite of death. And upon the 3rd day Jesus began to breathe of his own will again. And Yahveh caused Lila to make a picture of a dread angel from a projection of a thought record of the ancient winged race of winged men of the planet Heavy N, to appear to the watchers who guarded Jesus' tomb. They fled. And Jesus got up from the rock sepulchre and walked again among men. But the heart of Jesus could not fill with love for his fellow men who had slain him, even though it was the Sadducees, the Jewish Roman quislings, who had caused his death. Jesus lived in secrecy from the Roman government for some time, and eventually Yahveh found a way of bringing Jesus to the underworld of darkness and magic forgotten machinery. And Jesus learned that his Father's house had indeed many mansions. Jesus formed later one of the many groups of ray people who go about down there, trying always to do good work with the ray mech's might, and to make of life in the upper world what it should be, and frustrated always by the devil Darrow race, the degenerate men who cannot think anything but evil always. Still today, such groups with the same purposes as Jesus live down there and keep up the struggle against the stupid enemies of life who wish to keep it all secret from the men of the surface. And so far it seems that evil has succeeded and the good failed. Now, after releasing Jesus from the power of death, the young God Yahveh lay for a long time, long weeks in the healing rays, hoping for good strength to come again into his broken body. But it came now very slowly, and he could do but little organisation work with the services of the desperate Lila, for she struggled again, always to release herself from his mind's command. Too, afar off, a young Darrow of Lila's acquaintance, one who had known her from a child on, and who held a kind of twisted love for her beauty, sat and played always a detrimental ray upon the body of Yahveh, unperceived by him. for he saw that Yahveh had done to take command of her. He knew that the mental master of the tell-all hookup was Yahveh, and that he had Lila in his power so long as he could keep his weakened, crippled body awake. The devil knew that she must do as Yahveh willed. So, invisibly, diffuse and mild, but steady and unremitting, he played day after day his detrimental weapon ray upon the body of the young god where he lay and struggled against weakness and against sleep. The ray going invisibly through the rock walls of the many great old dwellings and borings and burrows and railroad tubes and vast underground highways, through the endless blanket of grey dust of all the vast beauty of the handiwork of the mighty elder race, through the great vaults of the storerooms where lay piled centuries accumulations of fabulous treasures and mysterious and magical weapons and mighty stim pleasure machines, and through the luxurious palace of the dead Satantes. And strength at last left Yahveh from this insidious sapping from afar. And even as I write, the same kind of sapping is going on my and many another worker's body from afar underground. For the devil race does not change, and still sits and gibbers down there, and tries to always keep good from being dominant anywhere. And weakness overcame the mighty crippled god, and he fell asleep. While he slept, Lila on Dirty was released from the grip of the augmented rays of the mech tell-all, and the thunder of Yahveh's mighty ruling thought through her brain dwindled to a gentle murmur as of a sleeping quiet sea, and Lila with great effort went and took the helmet of the mech tell-all off the godlike head of the black giant. Now Lila reversed all the connections of the apparatus, for she had learned a great trick from this, to her chance occurrence, from this sudden domination of her mind by Yahveh, and was now aware of a way of obtaining her goal of complete domination and subjection of Yahveh to her will forever. End of chapter.